Okay, so have you ever noticed that, like, feeling you get, in the pit of your stomach when something just feels, like, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Or, like, the butterflies when you're nervous about something?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's
It,
like your stomach has its own language.
right. It's funny how we have all these sayings about it,
Yeah.
and it turns out those expressions aren't just, like, random. They're actually hinting at something pretty amazing, this whole connection between our gut and our brain.
Yeah, it's like our language kind of knew it all along, even before the science caught up.
Totally. So that's what we're diving into today. This fascinating and honestly kind of complex relationship between your gut and your brain. It's often called the gut brain axis.
It's pretty wild stuff.
It is. And we've got some great resources for this deep dive, like articles from Johns Hopkins Medicine, a really in depth publication from the NIH, and some good overviews from Healthline and Cleveland Clinic.
It's definitely a hot topic. I mean, when you've got big institutions like that digging into it, you know it's important.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, our mission today is to break down this whole gut-brain connection and what it means for, well, your health and everything. We want to make it clear and engaging and not like, a boring biology lecture.
Right, keep it fun.
Exactly. So let's start with this crazy concept of a second brain in your gut.
Yeah, this always kind of blows people's minds. When we say second brain, we're talking about the enteric nervous system,
Yeah,
or ENS.
ENS, got it.
Now, important point here. It's not like a thinking brain, like the one in your head making decisions and stuff.
Oh, okay. So no existential crisis for our stomachs.
Not quite.
Ah,
But it is super complex, like unbelievably complex.
how complex are we talking?
We're talking over 100 million nerve cells. That's a whole network of neurons lining your entire digestive tract.
Whoa, 100 million. That's like a whole city of neurons down there.
Pretty much. And its main job is to control digestion from start to finish. Think about it. Moving food along, releasing enzymes, absorbing nutrients, and then, elimination. The ENS handles all of that. And a lot of times, it's doing it on autopilot without your brain even having to micromanage.
So my brain can just like chill out and let my gut do its thing.
To a certain extent, yeah. But here's the really interesting part. It's not a one-way street. The ENS is constantly communicating with your brain back and forth. And this communication, it affects everything, your mood, your overall health, the whole shebang.
So it's not just our brain telling our gut what to do, it's a two-way conversation.
Exactly. For a long time, the focus was on how our thoughts and feelings could affect our stomach, like stress causing stomach aches. And that's definitely true. But the research is showing that the gut is just as powerful in sending signals back up to the brain.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. So is that why some people with like IBS or other gut problems also have anxiety and depression?
It could be a big part of it. IBS and those functional bowel problems, they're not just about physical symptoms. It's like this whole mind-body thing.
Right, so things like constipation, diarrhea, bloating, pain.
Exactly. And for a long time, people thought anxiety and depression were causing those gut problems. But now, research, like what they're doing at Johns Hopkins, is suggesting that maybe it's the other way around. Like the gut itself is sending signals that trigger those mood changes.
That's a big shift in thinking.
It is. And it makes sense when you consider how many people experience these functional bowel problems. It's estimated to be like 30 to 40% of the population. So we're talking a huge number of people.
Wow, that's way more common than I realized.
It really is. And this whole idea that the gut can influence the brain, it's opening up new ways to treat these conditions. It's not just about treating the gut separately from the mind anymore.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, for example, a doctor might prescribe antidepressants for someone with IBS, not because they think it's all in their head, but because those meds can actually act on the nerve cells in the gut and help calm things down.
Interesting. So it's targeting the gut directly, not just the brain.
Exactly. And then there are things like mind-body therapies like CBT or even medical hypnotherapy. The idea is to work on the brain's role in gut health and the gut's role in brain health. Basically, improve the communication between those two systems.
Makes sense. So how exactly does all this communication happen? Like, what are the pathways?
Right, let's break it down. First up, we've got the neurologic pathway. And the big player here is the vagus nerve. It's a direct link between the gut and the brain, like a superhighway of information going both ways.
So kind of like a dedicated fiber optic cable just for gut-brain communication.
Exactly. And then within the gut itself, you've got the ENS, this whole hub of activity with all sorts of neurotransmitters. We're talking GABA, serotonin, melatonin, histamine, the whole gang.
Lots of familiar names in there.
Right. And the gut produces a lot of these neurotransmitters, like a lot. For example,
Hmm.
most of the body's serotonin, the highest concentration, is actually made in the gut.
Seriously, I always thought serotonin was like a brain thing.
Nope. The gut is the serotonin factory. And as you know, serotonin is involved in mood, but also in things like learning, memory, sleep, appetite, even bowel movements.
Wow, it really does a lot.
It does. And it's not just serotonin. Gut microbes themselves produce GABA, which is involved in controlling fear and anxiety. So even the tiny bacteria in your gut are playing a role in your mental well-being.
That's pretty wild. So, what else is involved in this communication highway?
We've also got the autonomic nervous system, which controls all those automatic body functions, has a big influence on the gut's immune response. It's all connected.
So, our gut's immune system is tied into this whole brain gut thing, too.
Yep, definitely. And then there's the gut microbiome, which is basically the trillions of microorganisms living in your digestive system. It's essential for the normal sensitivity of the nerve endings in your gut. Those nerve endings help your gut sense what's going on.
Okay, so we've got the neurologic pathway, the direct line. What about the endocrine pathway? How does that work?
So the endocrine pathway is all about hormones, and gut microbiota, they can influence the release of peptides from special cells in the gut called enterogumprin cells. Peptides are like little messengers, and they can travel through the bloodstream and affect the gut-brain axis.
Okay, so it's like a hormonal messaging system between the gut and the brain.
Exactly. The good example of this is galanin, which is a neuropeptide. It's involved in a bunch of different functions like pain perception, sleep-wake cycles, eating, mood, even blood pressure, parental instincts, and the health of nerve cells.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility for one little peptide.
I know, right? And galanin can actually stimulate the HPA axis, which is the body's stress response system. This leads to the release of cortisol, the stress hormone. Galanin can even directly stimulate the release of cortisol from the adrenal glands and norepinephrine. It's a key player in how we deal with stress.
Fascinating. So even our stress response is linked to our gut.
It is. Now let's talk about the humoral and metabolic pathway. This one involves bacterial metabolites.
Metabolites, that sounds a bit technical.
It is, but the important ones here are short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
SCFAs, okay.
These are produced when gut bacteria ferment dietary fiber, those carbohydrates we can't digest.
Oh, so that's why fiber is so important.
Exactly. SCFAs are a major energy source for the cells lining our colon, but they also have hormone-like effects, can influence our immune system, and even interact with our nervous system.
So they're pretty busy little molecules.
They are. And here's the thing. SCFAs can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and affect the activity of microglia.
Microglia. Remind me what those are again.
They're like the brain's immune cells, and they're crucial for brain development and function. And some research suggests that problems with how SCFAs are metabolized might be linked to autism. It could be that SCFAs affect how microglia communicate.
Wow, so our gut bacteria could be influencing brain development?
Potentially, yeah. And SCFAs also help regulate the release of those gut peptides we talked about and the production of serotonin in the gut. Remember, the gut makes about 95% of the body's serotonin. And while a lot of it stays in the gut and bloodstream, it can still activate nerve endings that are connected to the central nervous system.
So it's all connected.
It is. Now, another important bacterial metabolite is lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. This is part of the cell wall of some bacteria in our gut. And when the lining of our intestines gets leaky, what's called leaky gut, LPS can get into the bloodstream.
And that's bad news, right?
Yeah, not ideal. Our bodies make antibodies to fight LPS. And studies have found that people with major depression often have higher levels of these LPS antibodies. So there might be a link between gut permeability, inflammation, and mental health.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to the immune pathway. We've talked about inflammation a bit, but how does the gut microbiome fit in?
So the immune pathway is all about how gut microbes influence inflammation in the gut. When there's an imbalance in the gut microbial community, what we call dysbiosis, the immune system releases cytokines.
Cytokines.
They're like tiny messengers for the immune system. And when the gut is out of whack, it sends out these cytokines, which can affect other parts of the body, including the brain.
So inflammation in the gut can send signals to the brain.
Exactly. Take IBS, for example. In IBS, an altered gut microbiome can trigger the immune system in the gut lining, which leads to increased gut permeability, activates pain pathways, and messes with the ENS. You end up with both brain-gut and gut-brain problems, all because of the gut's influence. These disruptions can affect how fast food moves through your system, fluid secretion, sensitivity to gut sensations, even changes in the cells that produce hormones and immune signals.
It sounds like a vicious cycle.
It can be. And finally, let's touch on the epithelial barrier structure and function. This is basically the lining of your intestines, the barrier between your gut and the rest of your body.
The gatekeeper.
Exactly. And stress can actually make this barrier more permeable. That means bacteria and LPS can get into the bloodstream, which can have all sorts of effects on the body, including the brain. Stress literally makes your gut leaky.
Wow, stress really does mess with everything.
It does. And studies have shown that even short-term stress can change the cells lining the colon and reduce the production of proteins that make up the tight junctions in the gut lining. Those tight junctions are what keep the barrier strong.
So leaky gut isn't just some made-up thing.
Nope, it's a real issue. It's been linked to things like inflammatory bowel disease, necrotizing enterocolitis, and the low-grade inflammation often seen in metabolic syndrome, obesity, and diabetes. It's also seen in some types of IBS and even allergies. So if the gut barrier is compromised, could something like probiotics help?
That's a good question. Probiotics are those good bacteria, right?
Right. And because gut bacteria help maintain the gut barrier, it makes sense that probiotics could potentially help strengthen it. The research is still somewhat limited, but some evidence suggests that certain lactobacillus bacteria might help. For example, lab studies have shown that a multi-strain probiotic can strengthen the gut lining when it's exposed to harmful bacteria and inflammatory substances. It also has other beneficial effects, like reducing immune cell activation and promoting anti-inflammatory signals.
So probiotics could be like little helpers for our gut barrier.
Exactly. This all points to a strong connection between inflammation, the gut microbiome, and even mental health conditions like depression.
Right, we've touched on that.
Animal studies have consistently shown a link between gut dysbiosis and disruptions in monoamines, those neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that are involved in mood. So the composition of our gut bacteria seems to directly influence our emotional state.
And leaky gut probably contributes to that too, right?
Yeah, it's thought to contribute to the chronic, low-grade inflammation seen in stress-related mental health disorders. And people with depression often have higher levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines in their blood. The interesting thing is that our gut microbiota can actually influence the production of these cytokines. An imbalanced gut can trigger inflammatory pathways, while beneficial bacterial byproducts, like SCFAs, can help reduce pro-inflammatory cytokine production. It's like a delicate balance in the gut that can have far-reaching effects.
Wow, so much going on in there. And is this just about gut disorders and depression, or are there other conditions linked to this?
It's not just limited to those. Dysbiosis and increased intestinal permeability are now being recognized in a range of conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, asthma, and autism spectrum disorders.
Wow, that's a pretty diverse list.
It is. And when you look specifically at depression, there's a growing recognition of an inflammatory component. Interestingly, there's even historical evidence that anti-inflammatory drugs have shown some benefit in treating depression in certain people. Research suggests that inflammation can mess with how our bodies metabolize neurotransmitters, reducing the building blocks needed to make those brain chemicals and activating the HPA axis, all of which can contribute to depression.
It's amazing how research is now validating those ideas.
It is. So all of this has led to research into whether probiotics could potentially be used to treat mood disorders in humans. This is where the concept of psychobiotics comes in.
Psychobiotics, so like probiotics for your mind.
Exactly. So what have clinical trials in humans shown us so far?
Well, it sounds like a relatively new area of research.
It is. And the studies have been pretty diverse in terms of the types and dosages of probiotics used, how long the treatments lasted, and the types of people studied. But we have seen some interesting findings.
Let's hear some of them, both the good and the not so good.
Okay, so in a 2002 study, adults who were stressed and exhausted reported feeling better overall after taking a combination of Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium bifidum, and Bifidobacterium longum for 6 months.
Sounds promising.
It does. But a 2004 study with healthy students taking Lactobacillus casei didn't find any reduction in their anxiety levels. They did see some positive changes in their immune cell counts, though.
Interesting. So even similar interventions can have different results.
Right. A 2007 study looking at probiotic yogurt didn't find any changes in overall mood in a general group of people, but it did show improvement in self-reported mood in those who started with lower mood scores.
So it might be more beneficial for certain people.
Possibly. In 2009, a small study with chronic fatigue syndrome patients found that Lactobacillus casei improved their anxiety after 2 months.
That's good news for those folks. What about more direct links to depression?
Well, a 2011 study with people who had lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol found that probiotic use was linked to reductions in both anxiety and depression. Another 2011 study using Lactobacillus helveticus and Bifidobacterium longum found improvements in physical symptoms related to stress, depression, anger, and anxiety. It also improved focus and problem solving, but it didn't seem to affect overall perceived stress levels.
So it seems like probiotics might target specific aspects of mood and cognitive function.
Yeah, it seems that way. A 2014 study giving Lactobacillus helveticus to older adults didn't affect their perceived stress or depression, but it did improve their scores on some cognitive tests.
Interesting.
In 2015, a study looking at dietary habits found that eating more fermented foods was linked to lower levels of social anxiety and neuroticism. People who were genetically predisposed to social anxiety even reported fewer symptoms when they ate more fermented foods.
So the food itself seems to play a role.
It does. Also in 2015, a study using a multi-strain probiotic reduced cognitive reactivity to sad mood in healthy young adults. Basically, it helped reduce negative thoughts. And a 2016 study using Lactobacillus acidophilus, Lactobacillus casei, and Bifidobacterium bifidum found improved depression scores after 8 weeks.
So there are definitely some positive findings there.
There are. A 2017 review of 10 clinical trials found that most showed positive effects on depressive symptoms. But the researchers emphasized that we need more high-quality studies to confirm how effective probiotics really are for mental health because the existing studies are so varied.
So promising, but more research is needed.
Exactly. But it's exciting to think that we might be able to influence our mental well-being through our gut health.
That brings us to the role of nutrition. We've talked about it a bit, but let's dig deeper into how what we eat affects this gut-brain connection.
Okay, so as we've discussed, the gut and brain are connected physically through the vagus nerve and the ENS, and chemically through neurotransmitters and other signals. And our gut microbes are busy little factories producing all sorts of compounds.
Right, like those short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and acetate.
Exactly. They have a wide range of effects, including potentially helping to maintain the blood-brain barrier. Butyrate is especially important for that.
And gut microbes do more than just produce SCFAs, right?
Oh, yeah. They also metabolize bile acids, which are involved in fat digestion, and amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. This process creates other chemicals that can affect the brain. And of course, there's the immune system connection and inflammation.
Right, those inflammatory signals from leaky gut can be linked to brain disorders, so eating a diet that supports a healthy gut is crucial.
Absolutely. So what kinds of foods are good for the gut-brain axis?
Well, omega-3 fatty acids are important. You can find them in oily fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines. Studies have shown that omega-3s can increase beneficial bacteria in the gut and may even help reduce the risk of brain disorders.
Brain food in more ways than one. What else?
Fermented foods are great too. Things like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi. They contain live cultures of beneficial microbes, particularly lactic acid bacteria. Research suggests that these foods can actually alter brain activity in some people.
Makes sense. We're putting those good bacteria right into our gut. What about fiber?
High fiber foods like whole grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables are important for feeding our gut bacteria. These foods contain prebiotic fibers which act as fuel for those good bacteria, and studies have linked prebiotic consumption to a reduction in stress hormones.
So feeding our gut bugs can help us manage stress. That's cool.
It is. And then there are polyphenol-rich foods like cocoa, green tea, olive oil, and coffee. Our gut bacteria help break down these polyphenols, which can lead to an increase in healthy gut bacteria and maybe even improvements in cognitive function.
So that morning cup of coffee might be doing more than just waking us up.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And finally, there's tryptophan, an amino acid our bodies use to make serotonin. You can find it in foods like turkey, eggs, and cheese. So eating these foods could directly support serotonin production, which is important for mood.
Makes sense. By eating a variety of these foods, we can help our gut stay healthy, which in turn can benefit our brain.
It's empowering to know that we have some control over this connection through our diet choices. What about beyond diet? Are there other ways to support the gut-brain axis?
Definitely. Managing stress is huge. Since stress can negatively affect gut health and vice versa, finding ways to reduce stress is important. Things like relaxation therapies, CBT, gut-directed relaxation training, and biofeedback can be helpful.
It's all about taking a holistic approach, caring for both our mental and physical health.
Exactly. So to sum it up, focus on eating a diverse, whole food, plant-rich diet to support a healthy gut microbiome, and actively work on managing stress to support both your mental and gut health.
It's not about quick fixes. It's about creating a lifestyle that nourishes that vital gut-brain connection.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the gut-brain axis, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that the gut and brain are in constant communication, and they influence each other in really profound ways. It's not a one-way street. We've explored the importance of the ENS, the vagus nerve, the gut microbiome, neurotransmitters, and the immune system.
And we've seen that understanding this connection opens up exciting possibilities for improving both physical and mental well-being through diet, lifestyle changes, and maybe even targeted interventions like probiotics.
It's pretty amazing stuff.
It is. So here's something for you to think about. How might your own gut health be affecting your mood, your cognitive function, your overall well-being? Maybe try adding some more gut-friendly foods to your diet, or experiment with stress management techniques. See if you notice any changes. The research in this area is constantly evolving, so there's always more to learn and discover about this fascinating connection between your gut and your brain.
It's definitely worth exploring.
It is.